Okay, America, welcome to the fifth episode of Deconstructing the Matrix. Now, there's a big gap between episode four and episode five. Why? Well, the truth is I was a coward, right? Allowed people to convince me to stop what I was doing because of possible ramifications, repercussions, and the like. And I listened, and I didn't want to deal with maybe some possible blowback as a result of me saying things that people might not agree with, which is where we are in this country. People don't get to have opinions, people don't get to be honest, but worst of all, people don't actually care about the truth like they used to. And that's a big part of why we are in the situation we're in. And that's also a big part of why I'm redoing this podcast because here's the problem. I am almost certain that American democracy is flailing badly or at an end. And it may be too late, but I don't want to go to my grave knowing that I had useful input and I didn't do anything about it. So here I am. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. The second reason is I got kids and I want my kids to be able to hopefully live in a place similar to where I grew up. Now, where I grew up and how I grew up wasn't perfect. This country definitely wasn't perfect with me growing up, uh, socially, and really prior to the last decade, it was better than when I grew up, as evidenced by, luxuries that certain people are able to have or were able to have at that point. But we have definitely backslid in a way that no one could have imagined. And I feel like I was one of the first ones to see it coming. And I began making preparations many, many years ago for this decline this fall, but I was hopeful that it wouldn't happen. I'm still making preparations and I will be prepared for when it does happen. But my concern is that if I don't insert myself into the discourse, the problem is that nobody's proposing solutions. You got everybody on their side who's presenting why the other side is wrong when people have no idea that there really are, at this point, no sides. There's what used to be the left, prior to, roughly a decade ago. There used to be a concept of a left that no longer exists, and there used to be a concept of the right, and that now no longer exists. And we are in this morass of people believing exactly what they want to believe. And what that creates is a situation where we don't stand for anything and then we fall for everything. And that's exactly where we are. But the biggest problem is that we don't understand how to acquire knowledge anymore. And we only seek to acquire affirmation instead of information. And my objective is to hopefully maybe change some of that trajectory. Now, another reason why I'm doing this is there's therapy in this for me because I've been going through a tough time in my life, but the specter of this country going foobar and the end being near and having to prepare to live off the land scares the shit out of me. So I would love to try and make a change in any way I can. This is the best vehicle that I have. I'm not super wealthy and I don't have humongous influence. So this is the best vehicle that I have, putting out information and understanding that can create change. Now, what is this podcast about? This podcast is about, ultimately it's about getting the truth out there as much as possible. And when I tell you, I do not care whether or not I make a ton of money off of this, I really don't. I just want to do my part. and try and make this world a better place for those who exist in it and live by the golden rule. The golden rule, do unto others, right? That's what I envision a world that I want to live in being like. Um, Another goal of this podcast is to help us understand the dynamics that have gotten us to where we are and to help us steer the vessel in a different direction. Another reason that I feel like I have something to offer is because no one out there, all the podcasts, there are good podcasts out there where people are telling the truth. The problem is that all of the big podcasts out there now, all of them have a particular slant, and there's a lot of ones that are interested in the truth, but they are only interested in the truth as far as their perspective goes, and all of their content still is aimed at destroying the other side or pointing out the flaws in the other side. Now, as I just pointed out, like there's no sides anymore as people would like to think about them. Those are gone. The way that we acquire information now is completely different. The way we process information now is completely different. The way the algorithm sucks you into your information now is completely different. So what we used to think about right and left, even though we were incorrect at the time, we are even more incorrect now. So my goal is as much enlightenment as I can provide, and understanding that there are a lot of concerns that Americans have. And if any one person has a concern, their concern is justified because they have that concern. But we don't offer them an opportunity to be heard, which is, I think, how a lot of this change started. Uh, but at this moment, that's neither here nor there. Now, what makes this podcast worth a listen? Well, I think that what I plan to point out is that the boogeyman isn't this big monster out there that everybody thinks it is, right? Oh, they're controlling us by pulling all these strings. Now, there are, and we will discuss all of this in this podcast, but there are puppet masters that exist in our world, and they always have. They've always been there. The technology changes and the people change, but the pulling of the strings has never changed. It's always been there. It's always going to be there, especially when we make it so easy for them. Uh, Especially since I would say the Kennedy assassination, the powers that do pull the levers have had a better understanding of how to manipulate us. And we are just falling into their hands worse and worse. And at this point in time, we are the dumbest that we've ever been as Americans. Now, when I talk about dumb, I'm not talking about your IQ score or your SAT scores or your LSAT scores. I'm talking about how you process and acquire your information, your epistemology. There is no smart person that is ignorant, no matter what your IQ scores are. So, what we have become is dumb as hell, regardless of our IQ scores. You cannot be a smart person and be misinformed to the highest degree. And that's a big part of where we are. We are misinformed, underinformed, and choose to be such, which has created the reason as to why we are the boogeyman. I did a podcast episode about 5 years ago that discussed who was the biggest threat to American democracy. And I pointed out that the biggest threat to American democracy is us, and I have been proven right every day since. We have been and we continue to be the biggest threat to American democracy because we are so ignorant, and we choose to be because we just want to hear what makes us feel good. I have never been into politics. Never. I've been alive a long time, and politics has been around since before me. And the only time I started actually looking at what you might call politics is when I saw our humanity change. I have always been into humanity. I've always been into treat the next person as you would like to be treated. Make the world a better place one person at a time, one interaction at a time. And when I saw that we as human beings have chosen not to care about each other anymore, and it was blatant, and it became blatant in the last decade, then that's what mobilized me to try and figure out what the hell was going on. And I think I have a good understanding of it at this point. I think I've had a good understanding maybe for a couple of years now. And because I've had things going on in my life, I wasn't able to access the time that it needed to maybe produce a podcast that made a difference. So here it is. Here we are. Um, my biggest point is that I think that the only way American democracy and really the world at large, because if American democracy falls, then the rest of the world falls. It is going to be mass chaos worldwide. And my biggest point I want to make is that we will not survive if we do not evolve. Okay. Evolution is the answer, but we need to evolve the way we think, the way we acquire information, the way our epistemology has to evolve or we shall perish. Um, with that, I will get into the topic of this particular podcast. Now, every podcast will have a topic, and then typically I will present people who are useful to listen to, people who care about the truth and care about other people. And I will point out people who are absolutely the opposite of that. And there are a lot of them. And you can just turn on any television show, any cable news network, and see them all of the time. So when I said that no one is out there producing or creating solutions, I meant it. There are people pointing out what's happening. And what's happening is every day you can turn on your TV and see that we are devolving worse and worse into a terrible situation. But what is happening is that no one is creating solutions. Nobody is calling out things with the intent of improving our lives, but they're calling out things with the intent to make the other side look bad. Now, as we progress, I will point out the people who are doing things in the way that I think they need to be done, people who care about the information that we put in our brains and care about us evolving our intellect. So, without further ado, what I will do today is point out how the hell we need to vote for people because obviously we don't know how to do it. It's insane that we have chosen the leaders that we have chosen and we have no fucking idea on how to choose leaders. So I am super upset that I feel like I have to do something like this because it should be basic, but it's absolutely not. But I am confident that if you use a rubric to choose a leader like the rubric that I plan on pointing out, you will never be unhappy with your choice. And at this point, the only thing people do is point out or use a rubric to vote for somebody based on what they care about individually. Well, that's not how you do it. So let's get into it, okay? So my the way we'll do this is the way that we will do this is to put in order. The way we'll do this is we're going to put in order the characteristics a leader must have. And this doesn't just mean voting for governor or voting for the president. This is for any position of leadership, the principal of a school or the head football coach or the president of your magazine or whatever. But there needs to be an understanding of what it means to be a leader, what qualities a leader needs to have in order to be useful for the organization, not for your own personal needs, but for the organization. And the organization that I'm concerned about right now is America. And I'm confident that if people actually use a rubric to vote going forward, because at this point, the way I feel like people are unqualified to have a ballot. Now, there was the thing where, there's a lot of right wingers in the 50s that felt like there's a lot of people in the lower classes that didn't deserve the right to vote or shouldn't be able to vote. Well, I don't feel like that. I feel like people who don't take their vote seriously by understanding what, who, how they're voting for, then that's how they can become dangerous. And that's how they can become the biggest threat to American democracy, which we are seeing before our eyes. And that is not a political statement. It's not a right leaning. I absolutely do not ascribe to a right or a leftist. And in podcasts past, I have explained that. I think that if you choose to call yourself on the left or on the right, you're making yourself dumber because now you have to ascribe to these nebulous ideas of what's on the left and the right. And none of them exist anymore, particularly on the right, but even on the left. When people have an opinion and you're shouting them down on college campuses because they have that opinion, you are not in favor of free speech. You're not in the favor of a liberal ideology. You're in favor of a way to destroy someone's opportunity to share their views. Everyone, every individual has the is due the dignity for people to at least hear their views. And if you disagree, you disagree with discourse. You don't disagree with violent shouting someone down because they feel a certain way. There's a lot of people in this country, and we're going to get into this later on with respect to why we are where we are. There's a lot of people in this country that feel like, and I feel like it's fairly unfounded. I just feel like that large group of people are fairly ignorant at this point, but they feel like they are disaffected by America and America has gone in a wrong direction, and not a wrong direction, in a direction that doesn't benefit them. And that's why a lot of the reason why we're in a situation we are. So, but the point is that the right and left have disappeared and people just care about what they care about, but they no longer care about each other. And that's where I'd like us to get to. So without further ado, let's start out with the first characteristic that a leader of any substance needs to have. Okay. Now, this is not super objective, but if you apply this to your decision making, then you will improve the quality of leader you choose. So, the first characteristic is, does that candidate, does that person embody? So, we're going to start that over. Okay. So, the first characteristic, and this goes for any leader, whether they're the president of the Girl Scout troop or the principal of a high school, doesn't matter. Okay. The first characteristic that a leader of any consequence needs to have is, do you, as the person voting for this person, do you believe that that person actually believes what they're saying? Okay, let me repeat that. Do you? That's why I said this is not objective. This is fairly subjective, but it requires you to answer this question. Do you believe that that person who you are looking at voting for, do you believe that they actually believe what they're telling you? Now, why is that important? Well, if you don't believe that they believe what they're saying, then what's the point? What is the point? If you don't believe, if you believe that they're up there just doing lip service, which most of our politicians do, what they believe behind closed doors is completely different than what they're saying on the stoop. So, the first characteristic that a leader of any consequence needs to have is that person, or you have to believe that that person believes what they're actually saying. Because that is the foundation for why you might be voting for that person. And if you don't believe that they believe what they're saying, then you're just voting for ideology or a particular set of information that is nebulous and doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things with respect to the organization. When you are voting, it is about voting for the organization. It's not about voting for your individual beliefs. If you are part of the organization that you're voting for, you care about the organization, not what you individually want. So that is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is the candidate actually telling the truth? Okay. And those two things are not the same. Okay. Does the person actually believe what they're telling you? Doesn't mean that they're actually lying to you. It just means that they're telling you, I mean, what they're telling you could be true. But the question is, do they believe it? Okay. The second characteristic is, are they telling the truth? Now, how do you know? Well, that's where being a better consumer of information comes in, being a better steward of what goes into your brain, having a epistemological backbone, and caring about the knowledge that you acquire. So, is the person telling the truth? Well, the first way to know is, do they have a track record of lying all the time? Okay. Pull up all their old stuff, pull up all of the recorded information that they have. Does this person have a history of just straight up lying to people all the time? That's how you tell. Okay. Why is that important? Well, it's important because you want a person to do what they say they're going to do. And if you know that this person's a liar, then it's your fault for voting for that person, because you know there's no likelihood that they're going to do what they're saying. They're going to do what's in their own best interest, and they don't care about what you care about. You have no idea what they care about because they're lying all the time. Okay. And there's not many people in the body politic that you can actually say that about. There's a few people that are on the scene that are new, that seem to believe and be sincere, but the time will tell. When the lobbyists get to them, and when the pressure of choosing money, income, property, whatever they throw your way, power, when those things come knocking, it's hard to stay true to the game. So there's one guy, though, that has been saying the same thing for damn near 50 years, Bernie Sanders. And I'm not saying he's the perfect politician. I'm not saying that I would vote for him in certain circumstances. But my point is that we know, based on the track record, that Bernie Sanders believes what he says, because he's been saying the same thing for 50 years. So that's one way to check. What did he say 20 years ago? What did he say 15 years ago? What did he say last week? What did he say yesterday? There are some people that you can't trust from word to word. And I'm sure you can name some and one in particular. So, does this person have a track record of telling the truth? That's the second characteristic. The third characteristic is, does this particular person have a demonstrated history of any guiding principles? And it doesn't really, I mean, it matters what the principles are, but the question is, do they have any demonstration of guiding principles, any code of ethics? That's important, right? Because then that gives you an idea of how they're likely to behave going forward. Is this person a devout fundamentalist Christian? Well, that gives you an indication that at least they have some guiding principles. Now, a ton of these people that say that they're Christians in this moment are absolutely not acting like it because they're voting for the most unchristian things that we have ever seen. But at least you have an understanding of what their background is, where they come from, and it gives you an idea of whether or not they have any guiding principles, right? Some people may be atheist or agnostic. Well, that's a guiding principle. And you can tell that that person has some principles that they abide by. Or what if a person is a vegan, right? A vegan. That's a personal ethic, right? But does this person have any demonstrable characteristics or code of ethics that they adhere to? Okay, that's the third characteristic. Now, the fourth characteristic, and you may say, well, this should be number one. Well, number one is, what kind of person are you? What you could, because you can fake what your title is, but you can't fake who you are. You're going to be who you are no matter what. Okay. So when you get voted into office, you're going to be you. So those first several characteristics are about the person being a person that you would like to have leading your organization. So the fourth characteristic is, does this person have a demonstrable history of the qualifications required to do the job? Now, there are certain jobs that it's easier to determine what the qualifications are. Okay. Being a chief of a police department, right? Well, I mean, you want to have a guy who's been a police officer before. Okay. Uh, the the head coach of a major college football team. Well, you want a guy who's actually shown that they can win as an assistant, or be around an assistant, or win at a smaller school before they run your program. Okay. Um, in politics, has this person had a positive impact on their community in their political past? Has this person done anything of note to improve the lives of the people that he served? And I want to impress upon you that served is the operative word, because these politicians serve you. They don't serve themselves, they serve you. Their will is objectively to serve their constituents. And the question is, does this person have a track record of having the qualifications to do the job that you are voting for them for? Okay. You know, as a medical provider, does this person have the licensure, the training? You want the person that you're voting for to have these qualifications. You don't just vote for them willy nilly and hope that they do a good job. Next qualification. Now, most of the time when I talk to my children, this is probably the first qualification that I offer them. Because no matter who you are, what you do, where you are, this qualification will allow you the opportunity to be successful. So, this next qualification is, does this person have the track record of being a hard worker? People who have been around that person, do they say this person is a tireless worker, doesn't stop, works harder than everyone around them? You want someone who you're voting for to have a work ethic that is better than the people that they are serving, generally speaking. because you know that that person will put the extra effort in to get things done. Not how charismatic are they? Not do they say what I want to hear, but they don't believe in anything that they're saying. You want to know if this person is a tireless worker. Okay, it's important because if you're entrusting your organization to this person, then you need to entrust that this person is working harder than the people that he's serving. And in turn, the people who are following this person will have faith that this person is the one for the job. You cannot have a great leader that doesn't have people that want to follow them. And if this person's a tireless worker, people will notice that. They'll see it and they'll appreciate it and they'll trust that this person is somebody who can lead the organization. So that characteristic is, does the person have a track record of being a hard worker? Okay. Next, does the person, and I think this is the sixth characteristic, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Does this person have the track record of putting the organization first or an organization first, wherever they're coming from? Does this person have a track record of caring more about the organization than their own personal needs? Super important again, because you want to know that this person, once they get into that position, when all of the people come to them offering them favors, that they're still going to care more about the organization than they are their own personal needs. If you have a person that you're looking at voting for that has a track record where their personal needs are paramount, excuse me, then that person's not a great candidate to lead an organization because they will fold at the drop of a hat and bend to the will of the people who are pulling the strings. And lastly, listen to me. Lastly, does this person agree with my values? Okay. Now, I know most of you are going to be like, well, I'm not never going to vote for somebody who doesn't agree with my values. Well, sometimes your values have nothing to do with the organization. Okay. If this is an insurance company that this person is running, religious preoccupation has no bearing on whether or not this guy's going to do a great job running your insurance company. But all those other things will. Okay. So having someone agree your values should be on the list, but it should be the last thing on the list because you want to know that this person is the right person for the job, not the right person for what you want necessarily. But the goal is for the organization to do great. And the goal isn't for you to get your way. So oftentimes, what's good for the organization is not necessarily in your own personal best interest. And that's how we need to separate things. So let's list them once again. Okay. Does the person actually believe what they are saying? Number one. Number two, does the person have a track record of telling the truth? Okay. Number three, does this person demonstrate any personal guiding principles that allow you to recognize where they're likely to go with their behavior? You cannot take the person out of who they are. You cannot remove the person who they actually are from what they do. So, does this person have any guiding principles? Is number three. Number four, does this person have the qualifications demonstrated, past history of qualifications to be great at this job? Number five, does the person have a track record of being a hard worker? Okay, like I said, oftentimes I like that to be number one. The people that I respect the most, usually that's one of the number one characteristics. I may I may reevaluate this and change that at some time, but right now it's number five. Number six, does a person have a track record of putting the organization first? putting the organization in front of their own personal needs. That is number 6. And number 7, does this person agree with my values? That is the last characteristic when you're voting for someone to run an organization, lead an organization, to make an organization great. That is the last characteristic, even though it seems like it should be first, and that's how we've been voting, and you can see where we are. So with that, I'm back, and I hated to have to do this because it's kind of boring, but it's really important that people have a way to elect the people that basically are the leaders in their lives. Because the way that we're doing it now is demonstrably poor. And you can see it by the leaders that we have elected, not just in political office, but in local offices and in our small sports teams and the people who run our organizations, all of that. There needs to be a rubric. Okay. Now, the next episode will tell you guys what actually happened to Joe Rogan. It will chronicle the changes. I've been a long-term follower of this guy, even before he was on the big stage, the super big political scene, way before it, way before he was a darling of the right. I watched him become the darling of the right, and I watched him transform completely what he was with respect to his podcast, what he was with respect to his principles. So the next episode will, and why is that important? Why is Joe Rogan important? Well, for a long time, he had the biggest podcast in America, which is super important. That tells you where we are, what we think, what we like, what we want, and understanding the dynamic that created his situation is important for me. But I think it's also important for a lot of people so that they understand the pitfalls that we're making as human beings. And I think it's a good way to enlighten people about how power can corrupt. And we saw it, and we're still seeing it every day, not necessarily just with Joe Rogan, but with Joe Rogan, in my opinion. And like I said, I've been listening to him since around '09, and before anybody knew about him. Okay, before he burst onto the scene, before he became this darling of the right. I was telling my friends, many friends on the right, about him before they even knew about him, because he was completely apolitical before he became the darling of the right. But it'll be a fun episode, so stay tuned. Have a fantastic rest of your week.